Hey, y'all. Welcome to Widowhood and Wisdom. I'm Sarah. I'm so glad you're here. I'm also very sorry that you are here because if you are here, it means you are probably dealing with some really rough shit. Am I wrong? Grief is no joke. Widowhood fucking sucks. I totally feel ya. If you are going through the shit, I get it. I know everybody's journey is unique, but at some point we all have to deal with losing what we love most. It's a tough journey, and widowhood is definitely made harder by the fact that it feels like no one around you really gets it. Like they don't actually feel that pain and that loss with every fiber of their being like I am. You know what I mean? So it doesn't help that nobody gets it. But when you do find somebody who does kind of get it, like a fellow widow, somebody else who just like really understands your loss, it is such a relief. I always walk away from those with like, oh, thank God somebody else got it. They totally understood what I meant or what I was feeling, or they gave me some grace when I needed it. You know, like those people, I will literally cry on my way home when I find them because I am so relieved. It is so nice to find somebody else who just gets it. Yeah, widowhood is a fucking blast. If you would have told me as a new widow that I would survive this shit, I would have politely acknowledged you and been like, yeah. But inside, I would have been thinking, fuck you, ain't no way. I cannot do this. I cannot do widowhood. This is impossible for me. And yet here I am, a veteran widow, if you will, at almost 8 years into having lost my husband. But I'm still here. I'm still working on it every single day, but at least I'm working on it. So I thought I would start sharing a little bit of my wit and wisdom and perspective on widowhood and grief and healing and just kind of everything that comes with widowhood, just to give you a glimpse into what this shit really looks and feels like. Widowhood is just a whole lot to process. And of course, I will be adding my own spin on grief and widowhood. So hopefully others can take something away that helps them get through their widowhood just a little more gracefully than I have. So let's dive into today's Widowhood and Wisdoms. I wanted to record a little bit today about what's helped and what hasn't in my personal widow journey, just in case it might help someone else out there in their journey through widowhood. We all do this so uniquely. So here's just a little bit of what's helped me and hasn't, and kind of why and how, just in case it helps you too. As a new widow, I was desperate to feel better, to calm the chaos, to have just a moment of normal or even just quiet in my brain, especially once that initial zombie phase, that shock and numbness wore off. I was desperate to know how long was this pain and this chaos going to last, and how long was this deep, profound, vibrating in my bones grief going to last, because it seemed like it was never going to truly stop. And especially the brain fog, the forgetfulness, the just lack of ability to focus or think at all. I mean, literally could not think. It was like my brain had just shut down, and I was desperate to just feel better, to have a moment of clarity and ability to do something in order to feel better. And so, you know, I read the brochure that the funeral home gave me, of course, with all the stages and whatever of grief and the things to expect when you're a widow kind of book. I read all that. I even looked for the fine print. I read it multiple times. And when I applied it to where I was in my widowhood, I looked at that thing and I went, I have done all that. I have been through all those stages. I've done all these things. Why don't I feel better? why is this not working? What am I doing wrong? And I was really beating myself up, especially when year 2 was harder than year 1. I mean, I was like, I should feel better right now, right? And I don't. I feel so much worse. And I was just totally comparing my grief and my pain and my widowhood to what I thought widowhood and grief should look like, what my Southern Texas upbringing told me widowhood should look like, what grieving and how I was supposed to do this should go and what it should look like. And I was not fitting that at all. What was going on in my grief process and my widowhood did not seem to fit with what I had been raised. And I'm like, holy shit, now what? Now what do I do? I am not apparently doing a good job picking pieces up right now. I'm still bleeding over here. And it wasn't lining up for me. I was frustrated and angry and I didn't know what to do. I had all these shattered pieces of my life and I was trying hard to pick them up and figure out what to do and how to put them back together. And no one was helping me. Honestly, I'm not sure if anyone really could have helped me very much, especially early on. I was just a total train wreck. I was shattered. I was completely just in pieces and no clue what to do. I did my best to pick up and salvage what I could, all while acting like I'm fine, nothing to see here. Please don't look at me. Please don't stare. I know it's bad. It looks terrible on the outside, but on the inside, it was like hell and chaos and extreme pain. And it was tough to make sense of. So here's kind of how my brain envisioned my grief and widowhood. Imagine, if you will, you've been handed down this gorgeous set of heirloom fine china, like down through the generations, your grandmother's heirloom fine china. You know what I mean? And it's always in the cabinet because it's beautiful, it's priceless, it's valued, it's treasured amongst the whole family. And you don't use that shit often. So it's kept in the china cabinet. But then one day, because you're a fucking klutz, you trip and fall face first into that china cabinet with the entire set of heirloom china plates, and everything's shattered. And you are laying in the middle of that fallout, broken, bleeding, gushing blood, impaled with all of these shards of these beautiful dishes that are now destroyed. You have crushed them. They are laying in bits around you. And people saw it happen. People saw what just happened. They saw you fall into that and they see you laying there and bleeding, but they're not helping. They're not helping you because the fallout is so widespread. Those pieces and shards are everywhere and no one wants to get cut by them. No one wants to get bloody. Some even are like mocking you from the sidelines, kind of excited to see that you're destroyed. This is how I was envisioning my grief and early widowhood especially. And so then I'm like laying in this fallout of these beautiful broken dishes. What do I do? I'm bleeding. I'm gushing blood. Nobody's helping. And I had to figure out not only how to stand up and stop the bleeding, but also what am I going to do with these pieces? And so, of course, as you do, you start picking up as many pieces as you can. And again, acting like nothing to see here. For years, I did try to put those pieces back together and make them look like plates again, but it just never quite worked out. I could get them close, but they were never going to be the gorgeous plates that they were. And if you just breathed on them, they broke. They were very fragile. I finally had to come to a point where I had to acknowledge that, because while I had acknowledged and accepted that the china was broken, I was not ready exactly to acknowledge and accept that it was not going to go back together. I mean, at least some of this shit, right? A whole set of freaking heirloom china, at least some of it should go back together in some form of what it had looked like, right? To me, like at the time, if I couldn't get those pieces to look like the dishes they were, or at least some of them, then I had failed. I was just a complete failure. I'd failed the family, myself, everyone. And that just to me was not okay. I wasn't ready to do that yet, which of course then led to panic and feeling like I was failing. And so kind of in a last ditch effort, I had just moved to a new area and went to a new therapist and doctor in like one last try to figure this out. How do I put my life back together? What am I doing wrong? And so I come in and I'm like, this time I'm really going to go in there and really lay it on the table, just be myself, lay it all out there and see what happens. And so I did. Oh, bless his heart. And so I go in to this new doctor and I just lay the whole thing out there just like that, like the dishes and all of that. And he looks at me and he goes, so you've tried to put this back together. It hasn't worked. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like it's just too fragile. There's not enough pieces left. And he's like, in your story here, you seem like kind of a sentimental person. You keep things, but you also seem like a very creative person. So tell me, in real life, if you broke your grandmother's heirloom china, what would you do with those pieces? And I was like, okay, well, it's Granny's china. Like I would keep it, probably turn it into like some sort of mosaic table or something and add a few more pieces to make it kind of like a fun cocktail table outside where I can spill my whiskey and cigars on what had once been Granny's fine china. And so he goes, why can't you do that with these metaphoric pieces? Why can't you do that now? And I was like, because we're not talking about dishes, dude. We're talking about my life. You can't just make a cocktail table out of your pieces of your life, you know? And he's like, why not? Like, why do your dishes have to look like dishes again? Your life doesn't have to look like it did. You can take those pieces and make a whole new life with those pieces, like you would a cocktail table. Make something useful out of them or something beautiful out of them. And I'm like, okay, well, that all sounds fine and good, but then how the fuck do I do that? Like making a cocktail table out of broken china is one thing, but you're talking about pieces of my life here, buddy. How the hell am I supposed to piece something out of that? But because he kind of got it and was able to speak in my same terms and not think I was completely crazy, we worked on it really hard, and it was very enlightening to me. I was like, it's acceptable for me to take these pieces of my life that are left and really make them into something completely new and unique. And he's like, yeah, that's actually okay. You can do that. And it was the first time that I really truly went, well, shit, nothing else has worked. Like, I've tried to put this back together. Like, why not try this? Let's try to build something unique out of this last ditch effort with these pieces. And so it was the first time that it really truly clicked for me, was that therapist just being like, why can't you do something creative with it, with your pieces? That helped a lot. But just being able to acknowledge and accept that my dishes were never going to dish again. My life was never, ever going to look the same ever again. But I didn't have to throw those pieces in the trash. I didn't have to entirely give up on those pieces. While most people would, I can still make something useful out of them. It lifted a huge weight. And of course, I dove even deeper then into trying to figure out, well, how am I going to put these pieces together again? And that took a hell of a lot more fucking tools, like a lot more tools. Now, mind you, when I walked into that therapist's office that day, I had set myself a time limit to put my pieces back together, metaphorically, to get my life together, to figure this out, because I was just done trying. I had tried and tried so many times and fucked it up so badly and left less pieces than I started with and everything in worse shape. I was just done trying. But this one last ditch effort, I was like, okay, I'm really going to put everything into this. I'm going to give myself 1 year to really focus on healing my grief and just everything that had happened and figure out how to put my life back together. And if in that year I was still just an absolute shit show, then fuck it, I'm done. The pieces are all going in the garbage. So I walked into that therapist's office with that time limit, and I walked out of there that day going, well, now I actually have kind of a focus. Like, what am I going to do? He's right. I've tried to put my life back together like it was in some like semblance of what I thought it should be. And it just never worked out. So when I was driving home on that 2 hours, I'm like, well, gosh, what do I want my life to look like? Like, I don't even know at this point, especially being without Jeff for so long. It still didn't feel right to be without him. So I really decided I'm going to work really hard. You know, I have tools. I've been to therapy. I have group therapy. Like, I've done all of that. And I've read the books and things like that. But I had not necessarily used them at their most efficient, shall we say. I'm more of a like skim the directions, pick it up, try to use it. If I can figure it out and I like it, then that's great. I'll keep using it. If not, just kind of like whatever. I'm not going to go read the fine print usually and try to figure it out. But this time, after I walked out of the doctor's office, I was like, I'm going to take this year. I'm really going to do this. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to use my tools. I'm going to really focus on healing this and give it this one last go. And so I did that. I grabbed all the books and dusted them off and went over the old notes and journal entries. And I started to really look back, not just on how far I had come, but just on how bad it had been. And it kind of gave me the hope that I could do this. And going back and really looking at the books and resources that I already had, and then again, really applying, my therapy and my group stuff. Of course, COVID kind of kicked that in the butt, but we were still able to do some Zoom ones. Finding a really good suicide specific group helped as well, and taking advantage of that because it is a whole different kind of grief, which we will jump into. It adds so many layers, but really using my resources, like making those things a priority instead of I'll get to it, or if I think about it or if I have time, but making those like a high priority, and really sitting down and not only going back, like I said, back through my old notes and journal entries and letters, but also looking at those from the perspective of where I was now and going, well, gosh, if I made it through that, like, this doesn't seem that bad. I went through some rough shit. When I really looked back on it, I had to kind of give myself a little bit of mercy, going, wow, when I went back and looked at like the journal entries, what I went through in my early widowhood was so much harder than what I was even remembering at that time. And so I started to really kind of give myself finally the grace and space to work on healing and to work on my pain and my grief and figuring out what I really truly wanted life to look like. How am I going to put this together now? I'm going to heal and I'm going to live my best life, but what does that look like? So I kind of sat down and ruminated on, if I was really living my best life, like, what does that look like? My laying on a beach in Key West with a drink in my hand and happy. Yeah, yes, actually, that is my best life. But when I really dug deep, I was super missing the family connections, especially after my husband died. Things just shattered with everybody. There was, like I said, there was wounds and fallout across the board from the shattering, just from the pieces that flew, So it was hard to heal those, and especially to talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And that was hard for me. So picking up those tools again and reading the books and things, and then especially finding like Brene Brown and reading the book. First, I read The Gifts of Imperfection, and I started to give myself the grace I needed to heal and really allow myself to process the things that had happened and the feelings and the emotions of it. And I had not done that before because I am just not a big crier, for one. And when it comes to digging deep and hurting, I was hurting enough. Like, why force it if I didn't have to? But by just allowing it in the moment when it did happen instead of pushing it down like I had been, oh my gosh, don't cry in public kind of thing. And being able to just be okay with, yeah, I just fucking cried in Target. And that's okay. I mean, it didn't hurt anybody. And it made me feel a little bit better. But to be able to get to that point instead of walking out of Target in tears and being mortified by the fact that I had just cried in front of people, instead of walking out of Target and being like, I didn't say you fucking cried in Target again, which is not what happens. That was huge for me. And that was just through, again, really applying the things that I had read in these books and giving myself the grace and space to do the things that I needed to do in order to feel better, and finding especially the release valves, those relief valves that go off when you're really under pressure. Let me tell you about those. The relief valves have been my best friends and also my worst enemies. I had to really learn how to keep that shit under control, because the thing about pressure and release valves is you can actually release the pressure before it builds up. If you don't, well, sometimes that release valve will just blow by itself. And when that happens, there's usually more destruction and chaos that ensues, especially because my personal relief valves are crying, cussing, and a wicked sense of humor that just comes flying out now. All of those will come out at any given moment. It became really hard to control it for me. Especially the crying. In the beginning, before I became a widow, I was never a big crier. From the time I was young through the age of 41, I had only cried in front of other people outside of my family, my husband, maybe my children, and my parents a half dozen times. But then becoming a widow at the age of 41, all of a sudden, I was bursting into tears in public all the time over the dumbest shit, like the toilet paper aisle in HEB. I melted into the floor bawling because I could not figure out what toilet paper to buy. I'd always bought what Jeff bought, and people said it was, you were supposed to change things. And so I'm standing there staring at the toilet paper aisle, have an absolute panic attack breakdown, and I'm bawling in the floor. It was uncontrollable. The same thing happened getting a coffee a few weeks after my husband passed. I'm in line in a Whole Foods getting a coffee, and the guy asks me, hey, I'll give you this coffee for free if you know what song this is playing. Now, I had not registered that there was a song playing. I was so overwhelmed, number one, to be in public, number two, by my grief and just everything, that I was not registering there was music. I just wanted my coffee and to get out of there. I look at him and I'm like, what? And he's like, what song is this? And I realize it's a Christmas tune. And suddenly I realize also it is Christmas time. Like, holy crap, people are enjoying this. They're joyful. They're happy. It's Christmas time. And here I am crying and shattered. And I just burst into tears. I mean, burst into tears in the middle of this Whole Foods in front of this guy. And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's me. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was Christmas song. I don't know what song it is. And I just am trying to hand him my money. And he's like, no, just take the coffee and go. I think you need this. So not being able to control that, I was like, what the hell? I was mortified by it because I just was not a public crier. So it was so embarrassing to me. I felt so ashamed by it and embarrassed by it, and just, I hated it. But also I just could not control it. And I was like, how do I make this constant crying and just all these unexpected things that made me cry? How do I make this stop? What do I do? The other release valves, though, that have helped are the cussing and the sense of humor. Now, the cussing just comes natural to me. That's kind of my immediate go-to. Any little thing that goes wrong, I'm like, what the fuck? Or just to express the cussing really, truly helps me. I did trip across early on in my widowhood a very good way to express that and do it in a, we'll call it productive. I felt like it was a productive way. I was having a really stressful, anxious day. My phone rings, and at that point I was getting calls from random numbers all the time because of dealing with the bullshit and business end of Jeff's death. And so I answer this call, and it's someone I couldn't quite understand, but I get finally the drift that it was somebody asking to fix my computer. Now, Jeff was always the IT guy. We had an IT guy. So I knew there was nothing wrong with my computer. It took me a minute, though, to realize this was a scammer. Now, when I did realize that, I just let loose. I'm like, you're a fucking scammer. And y'all, I cussed like a sailor. I'm pretty sure I called that man a whore. I mean, I just unleashed on him, and I felt so much better after that. I will not lie. I did not feel bad about cursing that guy out. I probably should have. I mean, maybe he's a good human, but he also scams old people, and I felt rather justified in that. And it did help me release a little bit of the anxiety and pressure that I had to just be able to call somebody finally out loud to their fucking face a piece of shit like I wanted to so many other people. And so it felt really good. So I do maybe recommend using your cussing in a productive manner when and if possible. And then my sense of humor, just, it is my anxiety shield, I guess you would say. It is something that just pops up naturally anytime I am uncomfortable. And I'm the person you do not want to sit next to, because I will start to laugh. When I am uncomfortable, I start to laugh uncontrollably. And something will go through my brain and be funny, something that you don't even know about, and I am standing back there laughing my ass off. So my sense of humor is pretty fucked up, and widowhood has made that worse because there's like all the grief humor and just all the random I mean, I thought it was funny, but the day in the mechanic shop when I was talking to the boss that my son was a mechanic for, because I was having my car fixed, and it was right at Thanksgiving, right at the anniversary of Jeff's passing. I was a hot mess, and I was trying to get stuff together done for Thanksgiving to go have a big family one. And I'm in the mechanic's office. I'm like, oh my gosh, and there's so much to do. And I'm listening off to, as I'm talking to Hector, and another customer walks in and just sits down. And as I'm talking to Hector like that, this other customer just very dryly looks at me and says, why don't you get your husband to help you with some of that? And it just shot forward. Like in that moment, I could not help myself. And I was just like, I will stop by the cemetery on my way home and let him know that he should be helping me right now. I'm sure he'll be right on that. Like, yeah. And then I just kind of like laughed and walked out because it was kind of funny. I thought it was. Apparently it wasn't, because my son did call me later and he's like, who did you make cry in my boss's office? So, got to be careful with the humor sometimes. But those are my release valves that I have used along the way in my widow journey. Now, through the years, I have learned to use them more gracefully, more efficiently, more effectively, and less randomly than I did in the early years. But the other thing I have really learned is it's okay to cry in public. It is okay to burst into tears over the small things. I beat myself up so bad over that. Please don't do that. It is okay. Now, when I cry in Target or, occasionally still in the toilet paper aisle in HEB, it's not the same. It's more of a kind of humorous memory cry, or because I'm just feeling really big feelings, but it's not like a big melting panic attack, ugly cry usually. Now, can that happen still? You bet your ass it can. But for the most part, I have really found ways to keep it under control mostly. And that has just been through doing a few other things like journaling and letter writing, especially. Now, while that has always been a huge thing for me, like from childhood on, I've always been the kind of person that like had a diary or wrote stuff down, especially lists. That is a huge thing. Actually, note to new widows right here. If you are struggling through the brain fog like I was, write down everything. I have these little notebooks like this that I started carrying pretty early on in my widowhood. And I love these because I can have multiple ones. They're just little like quick go. I can fit them in my bag or my purse. And like this one is like my dog's medication list, for instance. But if you are struggling with brain fog, grab those because it's a great place to write down shit you need to do, thoughts you had, just quick notes. So that's just sort of a side note to new widows. So back to the journaling and letter writing thing. I have always done that in some form or capacity. I've always jotted notes down, things like that, always journaled kind of along the way here and there. When I die, there's going to be probably hundreds of random notebooks to go through. Hopefully the kids will just like burn that shit. So very early on, that came pretty naturally to me when I missed talking to Jeff. You know, at that point, in the couple of years before Jeff died, we had been empty nesters. And so we would just talk a lot. You know, we had a lot of time to, you know, sit and daydream or reminisce and chat and, you know, talk through things. And he was always the person when I was in absolute chaos and shit was hitting the fan, who I would like go to in absolute panic and anxiety. And I knew I could stumble my way through telling him what was going on, and he could somehow calm that chaos and we could fix it. We could fix it together. And to not have that anymore and not have somebody to talk things through with was really hard. And so the journaling and the letter writing began in earnest for me when Jeff died, and very quickly after Jeff died, actually. And I would just write to him, you know, like, here's what happened today, because it was a way for me to write down and process kind of what had happened that day, especially when I was going through the chaos and the business end of Jeff's death. That was hard. And so it was a place for me to kind of tell him what was going on with it, you know, catch him up on it as a way to take notes to myself of what had happened. So in a way of kind of, I guess, processing myself, what in hindsight, what was going on at that time. Although clearly when you go back and look at it, I was not processing it very well. But definitely the tone of all of those have changed. I continue to do it to this day. And I will write down anything, anywhere, anytime. Or if I have, you know, like a random Dear Jeff moment, I will record that any way I can. So if you can do that, if that's helpful to you, I highly recommend it, because I have recently started doing some of that through this video thing. Like, I will sit down almost as if we were on a Zoom meeting and, you know, with our whiskey and cigars, and be like, let me catch you up on how the farm has tried to kill me today, kind of things. But you can see like the tone just really changed. Another way that the writing and journaling has been helpful to me is that in my healing process now, as I'm really, okay, I'm going to feel the feelings and dig into this and try to get it healed. At my therapist's suggestion, I went back and started rereading my old journals from back when early in my widowhood, right after Jeff died. And oh my gosh, when I really started reading those, I was like, number one, like, damn, hot mess express much? Like, Jesus, pure chaos. I mean, even the writing, like, style, everything, it was just chaotic. You could really tell I was just a mess. And as I read those years later, I was like, my God, you poor thing. And then I also realized kind of at that time that I was reading them, like, Jesus, that was some really hard shit. That was some fucked up shit that you went through. And you had to do that alone without Jeff. Like, that was hard. And you made it through that. And so I was kind of proud of myself. And that was just one of those moments where I don't know if I would have been able to recognize that if I had not actually written everything down in the moment and then been able to go back and read it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go back and ever read it, but it's a great place to kind of catch them up on what's going on. Like, I catch Jeff up to this day on the grandbaby that he hasn't met. And I run through my feelings and emotions about that sometimes with him in these journal entries. So it's just been a very cathartic thing for me, but also a very informative thing for me with the different perspective of what I was going through then versus now. And sometimes I even look back at those early entries and go, how would I handle that all with the knowledge and tools that I have now? I did the best I could back then with the knowledge and tools I had. What would I do? But if anything ever blows up again, I can definitely do it better next time because I did it like that. So I will definitely be able to handle shit from now on because I've already handled harder. So being able to go back and actually read that has really helped. I highly recommend recording your thoughts, your feelings, talking to them in journal form. That it gets so funny when I am talking to Jeff in that journal form because it's often kind of a over whiskey and cigars thing. So that has really helped me. It may help others. There are many more things that have helped me that we will get into in other episodes. But for now, I will leave you with all of that widow wit and wisdom. And I hope that you can get through yours a little more gracefully than I have. Best of luck, best of love. Hang in there, cry the tears, cuss the words, and just know that you are doing the best you can with the tools and knowledge you have. And I'm rooting for you. So please follow along here at Widow Wit and Wisdom. I'll see you next time.